I promised you guys that this was going to be worth the wait because I bought a Ferrari F40. And no, this is not a replica, it's not a kit car, and it's not a Fiero. This is the real deal. It's as authentic as it gets. And I had to spend every single dollar that I could possibly pull together over the last 9 months to make this happen. And today we're going to embark on the single biggest build I've ever undertaken. We're going to be building a real F40 tube chassis race car right here on Stanceworks. And in today's episode, I'm going to tell you guys how on earth I got a real F40 body, what exactly we're going to be doing with it, and whether or not I think Ferrari is going to sue me into oblivion for it. So subscribe if you haven't already, because you're going to want to see this whole thing unfold. But before I show you the car, we got to rewind.
For starters, let's have a little bit of a Stanceworks history lesson, because I'm sure that some of you have no idea what it is that we do here. In 2021, Stanceworks set out to build a project that we believe is truly one of a kind. A project that embraces the do-it-yourself mentality while building the best car possible out of one of the most beautiful. It's a car we affectionately refer to as the 244 GTK, and it began life as a 1981 Ferrari 308 GTBI. Over the course of 2 years, we transformed this into a competitive time attack race car utilizing a 1,000 horsepower Honda K24 driveline. Literally no bolt was left unturned, and the outcome was incredible. We custom designed all of our own suspension from the uprights to the control arms, we built a one-off aero package, and redesigned every system within the car from the ground up. We've documented this process through more than 100 episodes, and we've showcased that process with every detail, both big and small. We've spent time in the shop and at the racetrack in our pursuit. We've yet to shy away from showing both the successes and the failures along this journey, and I think that's part of the reason we've seen so much success from this series. This project is far from over, but the heavy lifting is finished at this point, and now it's time to pivot and decide what comes next. We want to take everything that we've learned and do something even better. We want to push our own limits for what we're able to create, and we want to push the limits of what other people can expect to find in a build series on YouTube. And after a lot of deliberation, we realized it's simple. We need to build the coolest car ever built on the platform. So where do we go from the 244 GTK? Well, if I had to guess, you'd probably agree with me. There is no single cooler car on planet Earth than Ferrari's F40. Introduced in 1987 as the successor to the 288 GTO, the Ferrari F40 was the final car that Enzo Ferrari himself personally approved of. It was built to celebrate Ferrari's 40th anniversary, and upon release, it was Ferrari's fastest, most powerful, and most expensive car to date. In due time, we're going to take a deep dive into the history of the F40 and talk about all of the things that make this car truly one of a kind, but one thing is for certain, almost all of us had a poster of this car on the walls of our bedrooms growing up. Never at any point in my life did I think I'd ever even get to drive one of these cars, let alone build one of my own. But that's exactly what we are setting out to do. We are going to build the most badass, insane F40 to ever exist. But the main question is, how on earth did I find one? Well, that story begins with one late night session on the sim rig, turning laps mindlessly until I found myself in that familiar position all of us sim racers know so well. I was done racing, kicked back in the bucket seat, and browsing the web. With absolutely no intention of buying anything, I asked Google a simple question. What does an F40 hood cost? Depending on who you ask, it looks like it's about $80,000, and that makes sense given it's a $3 million car. But I did a little bit more searching out of curiosity, and that brought me to this Bring a Trailer auction, which sold for only $17,000, and that seems like a great deal by comparison, right? So then I asked the next obvious question, what's the whole thing cost? And that's something you're not going to find an answer to. But as the night continued, I kept asking questions, and eventually I stumbled upon all of the pieces to make the front half of a genuine F40, and they were all new old stock. Immediately, I knew what decision I had to make, and so some of you guys may remember all the way back in February when I posted a video saying this.
Over the weekend, an opportunity came up that I cannot miss. I will regret it forever. And this potential project, I genuinely think, will take this channel to a place I never thought it could be. It will be a project I never thought I could undertake. I'd never get the chance to do something like this, so I've got to go for it. That means if you want something bad enough, you got to make some sacrifices.
And those sacrifices include selling off every car that I can. We've sold the E28, the E30, and the Model A at this point just to pull cash together.
Mike, what's the update? I just got off the phone with, I just got off the phone with the buyer of the E30. So the E30 and the E28 are officially paid in full. I have cash in hand. It is now time to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to buy the front half of an F40. Hopefully I can find the rear half later. I don't have the money for that yet. I'm just one step at a time, but having found these parts, I don't think I'm ever gonna find something like this again. I'm gonna stay up late tonight and try to make a very expensive half car purchase of an F40. This is crazy that this is actually happening. I cannot believe it, but we're doing it. It's a worthwhile sacrifice. I feel good about it right now. We'll see how I feel in like 6 months.
Roughly 1 month later, the biggest crate I have ever seen arrived at the Stanceworks shop. It measured 8 feet square and nearly 4 feet tall. To protect the contents of this box, we had to air freight it from Europe, so you can imagine just how expensive it was to ship, let alone the parts inside of it.
It feels really cheesy to kind of get excited about a box, especially when I already know what's inside of it. And technically speaking, I have peeked inside the box. I haven't opened it. I've only seen what's very much on top, but this is the most excited I've ever been for anything on this channel or anything I've ever done in the automotive sphere, ever. This is such a huge moment. I am so stoked for this. I can't even put it into words. I think you guys are gonna love this. You probably already do. You probably already know what it is, but let's get this open.
Now, I don't want to be accused of being too dramatic here, but after removing the cover to this crate and pulling back the plastic, to reveal an F40 front end in my shop was truly a life-changing experience. This was unlike anything I had ever anticipated. Honestly, somebody needed to pinch me to make sure this was real.
So I'll reiterate it again. All of this is a real F40. This is not a replica. This is not a kit car. This is a new old stock OE front end, all new old stock panels in here. And in this box, we've got the entire front clam. We've got both rocker panels and quarter panels. We've got both doors and we've got a roof. So the next crate that's showing up is gonna have the rear clam and the underbody. That'll kind of give us the entire shell. And by the time that we have that is when this video will actually go up. So you guys are way in the future right now. But this is the real deal. It's actual carbon Kevlar. These are real F40 parts, and it's insane. I didn't know that you could actually buy these, especially new old stock. That's insane to me, but actually, I'm not gonna call it affordable. Most expensive thing I've ever bought, but not that bad considering the real thing as a complete car is like $3 million. We're doing really well in that department. We have not crossed the $3 million barrier. Let's pull this thing out.
Now, amongst all of the Patreon and Discord subscribers that have known what's been going on behind the scenes for the last 9 months, the most common question is this: how on earth did we find new old stock panels, parts that have never even been on a car? Because it's one thing to find used or crashed pieces, but those that are still new is something else entirely. The answer to that question, though, is simply pure and blind luck. All of these parts came from the exact same shop in the UK, and what they were doing with them is beyond anyone's guess. But now they're ours, and they're going to go on to live a life more extreme than Ferrari ever imagined. It's clear that the hood was produced many years more recently than the rest of the body, which still has tags on it that range from 1987 to 1992. And it's abundantly clear that most of these parts have been moved around warehouses for the last 35 or nearly 40 years. All of them sport the same orange-tinted factory gel coat from their carbon Kevlar molds. While most of the stuff is in really good shape, the roof itself is going to need a lot of repair. But that's for a future episode and a problem for future me, so let's keep the party going because we have another huge crate about to be delivered. It was another 6 full months before I could find another clamshell that was suited for the project, and before I could even begin to afford it. Add in some pretty serious shipping time despite also air freighting this crate too, and that puts us into the middle of August before we could even complete the body itself. And as you guys will see as this episode unfolds, there's still a lot of parts and pieces we still need to acquire. But at least at this point, we have something that resembles an F40.
It's upside down.
Just dump it out.
Yeah, just dump it out.
Here, let's just come that way with it, yeah. All right, that is the rear underbody, which is pretty sick because this one is off of an actual LM, like an actual, this has done laps at the 1994 Paris 1000. It's real deal race car stuff. I'm stoked.
I had a cat walking all over it. There's a shit ton of cat pits on it.
Okay. Should we flip it?
Yeah. Here, I can get it.
Just be gentle with the top part of it because I don't know how fragile it is. All right. And that's the big piece we've been waiting on. That's insane. I don't know how well it'll sit down, so.
I'll hold it down. Yeah.
No, it's okay. You can let it sit.
Now, unlike our front end parts, these rear end pieces are used. And as you can probably tell, this rear clamshell has been repaired in the past, and that's part of how I acquired it. It's because it didn't cost a literal boatload of money. I'll talk about the racing pedigree of the rear underbody later in the episode, along with actual footage of these parts, but let's keep making progress for now. Once these pieces arrived, we had to build a chassis table, and I'm going to showcase all of that work and getting the parts mounted to it in next week's episode. But that does beg one important question.
You guys are seeing this in real time, but the truth is this is 9 whole months in the making. It's taken me that long to acquire an entire F40 worth of body panels, but no matter how real these things actually are, that's all it is just the skin of a car. We have to build the rest of it, and that's why we have this gigantic send cut send chassis table. So let's talk tube chassis. I want to tell you guys how we're going to build the rest of the car.
I'm hopeful that you're familiar with Nigel Petrie and his engineered-to-slide Toyota Hilux. It's the perfect example of how a tube chassis can be utilized to build a very special vehicle. As opposed to a ladder chassis or a more common unibody, it uses a space frame for the structure of the car. This is admittedly about as hardcore race car as it gets when it comes to construction methods, but it also yields the highest performance possible, at least with what we're capable of given we can't build a custom carbon monocoque. But it will allow us to build an incredibly lightweight, incredibly rigid, and incredibly safe chassis that will yield an F40 unlike anything else. And for those that are concerned that this is a step backwards from the carbon tub that you might find in an F40, well, contrary to popular belief, the F40 does not have a carbon or Kevlar tub. It is a steel chassis that is remarkably similar to the one found in the 244 GTK. There's only a small handful of differences, but for those of you that have seen our previous 244 GTK build episodes, you'll probably understand why I want to revise this. I don't want to copy or replicate what Ferrari did. This is 35-year-old technology, and I think we can build something lighter, stronger, and better. I've built my own tube chassis cars in the past, and some of you may be familiar with one of them, my BMW known as Rusty. And so I want to take everything that I've learned since I built this car and execute it better than ever before.
So a tube chassis F40, let's talk about what this car is going to be and how Ferrari might feel about it. Let's start with the latter. Do I think Ferrari's going to hit us with a cease and desist? Well, I'm going to hope not, but there's a chance that they might. We've never heard anything about the 244 GTK, and that's probably because of two things. One, I've never really messed with the branding. Yeah, I put my own badge on it for the 244, but I have respected Ferrari's decal and badging and the integrity of their name, aside from maybe a few comments about how the car was built, and they probably agree. But they care a lot more about what you say about the F40, and to be clear, I think this is probably one of the coolest cars ever made, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to build something that every Ferrari guy out there will still respect in some fashion, including Ferrari themselves, but they might still have a bit of an issue with it, so we're going to have to wait and see whether or not they're going to send me a letter that says, hey, you can't call it a Ferrari or you can't call it an F40. We'll find out. What is this car going to be? Will they even like it? Well, like I said, it's going to be a tube chassis. It's going to be a race car. Is it going to be a track-only race car? No. I'm not going to put all this time and money into a car only to have it be a dedicated track car. The 244 went that way, and I don't want to do that again. This will get driven on the street. I know I've said that before. I'm going to hold to it this time. But it's important to realize what it is that we're building. You've seen what a tube chassis looks like underneath, and you know what this car is going to be made of. You know what the bones are going to look like. It's never going to get sealed up. It's never going to be watertight. It's never going to be comfortable. It's never going to have kind of a traditional interior. It's going to feel like a race car no matter what we do. It's also going to have some pretty serious race car parts on it, because you guys know me at this point. I'm going full tilt. We're building, I don't know, the greatest car that's ever been. Let's push it to the limit. I want this car to be the ultimate example of an F40. No question. I don't want to pull any punches. I want to build the best version that I'm capable of. Of course, we don't have millions of dollars to spend here, or $8 million, or hundreds of thousands. We're having to make this work with what we've got, what we've already spent, what our sponsors are bringing, and you guys watching these episodes to make this happen. But we're going to go as far as we can. And I already have the engine for this thing, as some of you guys on Patreon already know. The engine is decided. It's already in hand. That's coming in episode 3 or maybe episode 4. It's going to be worth sticking around. So subscribe if you haven't, because you don't want to miss it. Click the bell, all that kind of stuff. We have an engine plan. We've got a gearbox plan. We've got a suspension plan. Of course, H&R is coming to the table. We're going to build some really cool stuff. It's going to be full push rod, bell cranks. We're really going to kind of get wild with it. Maybe we'll even go with a heave spring setup. I don't know yet. I got to get a little bit further into the engineering process. We've already got some of our suspension components already. We've got a wheel partner already. I'm going to show you guys in an upcoming episode. These are not the wheels that are going to be on the car. They're not. These are just for mock-up, and I know that they're cool mock-up wheels, but that's all they are. I've got something even more special in store. Kind of as said, this car is going to be as far as we can take it. We're going all the way with it. It's going to take a long time to get done. It's going to take a couple of years. That's just how this is going to go. But hopefully you guys are along for the ride. It's just going to take some time. Lots of problem solving, lots of talking through it. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this. This is something I've been wanting to do for a long, long time. But at this point, all that's left for this episode is to get nerdy and start talking about F40 details, because I want to show you guys exactly what it is that I bought and where we're going. I want to start with my favorite piece of this entire car, and if you're going to try to guess what it is, you're probably not going to guess it right. It's actually the rear underbody, this rear valance, this rear bumper piece in black. Now, how is it that this piece, maybe the most boring piece of the whole car, could be my favorite one? Well, it turns out that this piece is the only one in the car that is off of a real GT1 F40 race car. This piece has real racing pedigree. And the reason I know it is some small details. It is one of one. It is the only rear underbody panel with this duct configuration. It was modified at some point in its life, and it is the only one that looks like this. And in fact, I have original footage from the 1994 Paris 1000 when this was raced. It was only raced one time on one of the most iconic F40 race cars, the toe tip race car. Now, when I found this piece, I knew I had to have it. And when I found it, it was even still in its original green. And I'll show you guys some details. You can see some of that green paint still on the inside. It got repainted at some point, but it's the real deal. It's off of a GT1 F40 race car. It doesn't get cooler than that. Even if it's like the lamest, silliest panel, it's the real deal. And the fact that I have found that footage and those photos that identify this particular one-of-one piece is That's what I'm all about. This gets me so excited. So what are we gonna do? Will it go back to green? No, I'm not gonna paint this car bright green. I would have left it if I could have gotten the other panels that went with that car, because when I found this piece, the seller did have the original GT1 configuration, rear clamshell and front clamshell. And trust me, I tried to figure out how to buy them. It still had the full livery on it and everything, but when I say those parts are expensive, you have no idea. You could buy a house for what those parts cost. And considering I don't own a home, it would be pretty reckless to then go buy those parts. And I don't even have the money to do that. But I had to settle. I had to just go with the one cheap one. This was not cheap. None of these parts are cheap. We're going to talk about parts prices here in a moment because this stuff gets crazy. But I did get this one. It's my one race car part. I'm excited about it. It's my favorite piece on the car. It has real racing history. And if any of you guys know any more about it, if there's some like F40 encyclopedia that can tell me more about the GT1, not GTE, but GT1 configuration cars, of which, as far as I know, there were only two. There's a toe tip car and a black and red car. If you know more about them, tell me. I want to know more about these. Maybe you know why this one was modified versus any of the others. It'd be cool to know. Now let's talk rear clamshell.
As mentioned, the rear clamshell is just a road car part, so by comparison, it's relatively boring, but that doesn't mean it isn't cool and doesn't have some unique features. For starters, there's the rear grille that's attached to this clamshell, and it's one of the earliest versions. It's from one of the earliest F40s built, and you can tell by these rectangular rear fog lights. You'll also notice that we're missing a rear wing element, and while I could have bought one, I didn't want to run a factory one because we're going to be upgrading to an LM-style dual-element rear wing. I also need to get the rear perspex or glass for this thing, and taillights, and all sorts of other pieces, but as you can tell, this is going to be sick.
Now I already know the most common question in the comments already is going to be, where are the A-pillars? Because it looks pretty weird without them. I wish I had a set, but the problem is that the A-pillars are made of steel on this car. They're part of the actual steel chassis that goes underneath the body, and I don't want a factory chassis. We're going to be building major improvements over what Ferrari had in the 80s. But that means I don't have a set of A-pillars to go on this car, but there is one upshot, and that's that the 308 has an identical front windshield and pillars. It's almost the same car from the belt line up, so we're just going to take a mold off of the 244 GTK and take a kind of template off of my Lexan windshield and just transplant it onto this car. We'll make it out of carbon so that it will actually be lightweight and match the rest of this thing, and gives us a relatively simple solution without having to go get the steel parts off of a factory F40 chassis when I don't really want them, nor do I need the weight. We're gonna have a roll cage structure inside of this thing. That stuff's all needless to me. Now we got roof, doors, and then rocker and quarter panels. Honestly, if I had to guess, I bet the roof is one of the rarest parts of these cars, because how do you really get one? How often do they need to get replaced? How did I get one? Well, as kind of told earlier in the story, everything from this point forward on this car is new old stock. It is genuine stuff. It's been around since, I think some of this stuff has tags from 91, some of it's 87, and it's been just moved around warehouses for 35 years. The roof is the most damaged part. It's missing parts and pieces to it. Could I get another one? Probably. Could I afford another one? No. We're just going to make it work. We're going to figure it out as we go. The quarter panels, they're straightforward. There's nothing kind of unique or interesting about them other than they're from an F40, they're carbon Kevlar, and when you see the back side of them, you realize that although these cars were really cool and really nice, the construction of these panels, at least back in the day, I know the current ones, if you buy a new one from Ferrari, they're much nicer. These old ones, little rough around the edges. But the doors are almost as cool as the rear underbody panel. These are LM doors. They do not have a provision to roll the window down inside of them. We're gonna have to make plastic sliding windows, just like the LMs had. Is that inconvenient? Absolutely. Is it sick? Absolutely. And from the inside, you can see the carbon Kevlar shells. It's gonna be a really cool detail. We're not putting door panels in this thing. These doors are sick, they are authentic, they're lightweight, and they are as race car as it gets. Now when it comes to the front end, I'm gonna be honest, I prefer the LM front end. It's got the kind of sealed headlights, they're a little bit wider, it's got the big duct in the hood, but What was important to me at the moment is I wanted the entire body of this car to be 100% authentic. No replica parts, no aftermarket parts. This is a real OEM F40 hood, and that's what I wanted this car to be. I figured later down the line I can put an LM style hood on it because most of the F40s that you see out there do not have the real deal on them. It doesn't really hurt the value of them to put an aftermarket hood on it, but it's also a real F40, so who cares if the hood isn't authentic? In our case, I want everything to be the real deal. Now, with that said, I'm still gonna cut this hood up because it needs to have a big old vent in the hood. We need it for our cooling system. I think it's gonna look better, and how often are you gonna get the chance to cut something like this up into pieces? I'm gonna take the opportunity. Why not? Later down the line, we'll explore the idea of an LM front, but for the time being, I'm gonna make my own headlight buckets that go in this, or at least kind of turn signal buckets with the fog light. The authentic ones, just this unit used $14,000 each. Can't afford that. Am I gonna put the pop-ups in it? No, the pop-ups look stupid up. We're gonna keep them down. Probably put vents here, more like the 308. I think it'd look better. And it's my car, I get to do whatever I want. So, we'll figure that out as we get there. As far as other like weird little part prices and stuff, I found a set of the latches that hold just the front clam and the rear clam down. There's 4 latches total. You wanna guess what they cost? $12,000. We're gonna have to figure solutions out for that. We're gonna have to figure out solutions for pretty much everything on this car because while we do have the real deal for the skin, there's a lot of little details that are incredibly, incredibly expensive that I don't care enough about to try to authenticate or do the real thing. Do I need true latches? No, come on, get real. We can find something real motorsporty to put in there that is a fraction of the cost. And we're gonna have that approach for a lot of the parts and pieces on this car. Some parts will be real, some parts will be my own choosing so that we can get this thing to the finish line because I don't have the $3.5 million it would cost to have a real complete front to back F40. But I'm still gonna stand by the fact that this will be a real F40 when it's done. It will be a real tube chassis F40, and if Ferrari had built a tube chassis Group 5 F40, this is more or less the approach that they would take. If I had an F40, a real one, and said, I don't care about the value, I want to build the craziest one possible, this is all I would attempt to keep off of one. This is where we'd start. It's as real as it needs to be. It's a real tube chassis F40. So hopefully you guys are excited for where we're going. This is going to be a sick project. Again, make sure you're subscribed if you're not. Episode 2 is coming out next week. We're gonna dive into getting everything set up on the table. We're gonna be building our send cut, send chassis table and lots of other little details. It's going to be the first step towards building a tube chassis F40. So come back next week, we'll see you then. And then episode 3, I'll show you the engine. I'll catch you guys next week.